Okay, I think we can get started. Welcome, everybody. It's always a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Aviad Tabory, who we were saying before. I've known since you're 3 years old. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
And I always say I think it brings kavod avein really too. His father was my Rosh Hashiva for like 4 years in high school. Really, Rabbi Yamin Tabory, really a wonderful Talmud Chacham and Rosh Hashiva. Even though back when I was in high school, he had certain run-ins here and there. I wasn't the greatest student in the world when I was in high school, as my anybody who knew me back then can attest to, including my sister who's smiling. I wasn't like her. Anyway, and Rav Dewer then kind of went to Gush, and Rav Aviad really grew up in Israel. He learned in Gush, learned in Oretz Yon. He served as a rabbi in the UK for a year, I believe, and on
2 years. Yeah.
Shlichut and set out schools. He teaches now at Eretz Tzvi. He started many Midrash Lindema, Midrash Rova, and I'm holding his book that he put out a couple of years ago, The State of Halacha. It basically goes through the history of Israel. Fascinating book, and he discusses the halachic concepts. And as we were talking about before, he has a new book hot in the press, not yet published, before the State of Israel on matters of halacha. And Rav Deborah lives in Alon Shvut, right? You're still you're in Alon Shvut,
Yeah.
and he spends a few weeks every summer at Camp Stone, which is where he's from. So he didn't get up at 3:30 in the morning. It's only 8:30 in the evening. Okay, Rav Tavori, Vavakasha.
Okay. Thank you. Hi. Thank you very much. I just want to say that Rabbi, every time I speak to Rabbi Kelman here if I give a shir, he has this introduction, and I think that I want to mention that my father, Lava Shalom, would have a lot of nachas from Rabbi Kelman in what he does and the project he's involved in and teaching, and it really is. I think he's schlepping a lot of nachas up there from you, Jay. So. Al davar ze ekal be'enecha. Okay, so I chose a topic which I hope is a little bit more interesting or kind of off the beaten path of a topic to do with the parsha, and I called it "Why didn't all the Gdolim make Aliyah?" Now, as an introduction, I'll explain two things. A, I'll explain why I chose this topic for this week's parsha, and B, and with that I'll start with is that I really want to make it very clear that this shir today is not judging in any way anybody that I'm going to mention here in the shir. I'm not here to give mussar rebuke or judging anyone. I just find it quite fascinating to go through the different sources I brought today and to perhaps have a little bit of an indication of the different kind of issues that Jews brought up in the centuries, mamash centuries, towards Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. And of course, the reason why I chose this topic for this week is that in this long week's Parsha Matot-Massei is the famous pasuk V'orashtem et haaretz v'yishavtem ba. The Torah teaches us that you shall inherit the land and settle the land. Rashi seems to understand that this pasuk is just describing the future, that when we come to the land of Israel, you will inherit the land, you will settle the land, while the Ramban very famously understood that this is the source for the mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah to dwell in the land of Israel. In his commentary on this week's parsha, the Ramban goes into a long description, detailed description of what this mitzvah includes. Amongst other details, he includes the mitzvah to fight for the land of Israel, not just the mitzvah of settling, but kibush Eretz Yisrael, arguing that every milchama, every war in the land of Israel is defined as a milchemet mitzvah, which has halachic ramifications, which I'm not going to right now, as well as the Ramban's commentary on the Rambam's book of mitzvot, in which he, again in great detail, writes about the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, especially because the Rambam does not bring this down as a mitzvah. The Rambam in his book of mitzvot, in the whole 630 mitzvot, for some reason did not mention a separate mitzvah of living in the land of Israel. The Ramban is beside himself when he realizes as if, and he attacks the Rambam, and he says it's a very important mitzvah, and he explains it as well. So this week's parsha really is the parsha in which it would be appropriate to discuss the mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael, and I would say the following before we start the sources. Just another introduction, which is quite important for this, is that how does one explain the Rambam's opinion that the Rambam does not bring down in his book of mitzvot a positive mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael? Is this an indication that the Rambam doesn't believe that there's a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael? That is a very difficult notion to make, and that is because the Rambam in his book of law in Mishneh Torah does discuss the importance and the value of living in the land of Israel. So what is it, a technical matter? This is not my topic right now. This is a fascinating topic. So much has been written and discussed about this question. So many explanations have been given in Jewish history to try to explain why doesn't Maimonides, why doesn't the Rambam count this as a separate mitzvah? It's not my topic right now. However, some might come to the conclusion that perhaps this is a machloket, this is an argument, and really, according to the Rambam, there is no mitzvah nowadays to make aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, which could be the most simple explanation to why Gdolei Torah rabbis didn't make aliyah in the past hundreds of years, because they really thought it's not a mitzvah. There were people, by the way, that really thought that. The famous commentary Megillat Esther on the Rambam. However, and this is where I'm beginning this year, I would say that not just the vast majority, but I would say the consensus almost of poskim in all Jewish history has been that the mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah to live Eretz Yisrael, is a mitzvah of the Torah. I would say that again, not even vast majority, but a consensus amongst poskim in all generations is to accept the Ramban's opinion that there is a biblical mitzvah in all times, perhaps, and that we'll discuss that, to live and dwell in the land of Israel. And after we concluded in saying that, the question is, therefore, why didn't great rabbis in Jewish history make aliyah? So I can't go into people's minds and understand. What I try to do today is I try to collect letters or tshuvot in which Rabbanim address this question directly. Meaning, I'm only referring to literature that was left by the rabbis themselves, in which they gave an explanation. They tried to explain why they did not make aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. Again, I'm not judging. I'm not criticizing. I'm just sharing. I think there's a lot. It's very interesting to look in Jewish history and to actually hear these rabbis express their reasons for choosing to live where they're living, how they're living. I just find it fascinating. So let's start in source number one. I hope that I can actually, I think, share. Let me see. Yes, I have. I can actually share this source sheet on the. If you see it, I hope you see it. Yes, can you see what
Rabbi,
I
make it a little bigger if you can. Just widen it on the page a little bit. So I think, yeah, okay, good. Yeah, you're much better. That's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. So I want to start with Rabbi Aviad Tabory, 800 years ago. Very appropriate to mention him now. A few weeks just before Tisha B'Av, we read one of his most famous kinot that he wrote about his love and affection and ga'aguim, his to Eretz Yisrael, libi b'mizrach, v'anuchi b'sof ma'arav. The famous poet, the famous poet Rabbi Aviad Tabory, who wrote the famous book in which he argues for the Jewish philosophy in the book of the Kuzari, a book which he argues back and forth between the king of Kuzar and the rabbi, talking about the principles of faith of the Jewish faith. So we all know that Rabbi Aviad Tabory is considered till today one of the greatest lovers of Zion in Jewish history. In fact, we may even give him the toar of the first real political Zionist, perhaps the person who really established this philosophy of the and wrote it in a very meticulous way about Am Yisrael's relationship to the land of Israel. And in the book Kuzari, when he talks and talks and talks about how he loved Israel and how unique it is and how special it is, and he goes on midrashim and quoting Chazal and Gemaras, at some point the king of Kuzar turns to him and said, as you can see on the page in front of you, and by the way, I brought here a lot of sources. I don't intend to read all of them. You can hopefully read them afterwards. But he turns to him and says, Rabbi Levi, you're talking for hours here about your love to Zion, and yet here we are in the Starbucks in Madrid. What's your story? Like, why don't you just get up and go? What's stopping you? So I have on the in front of you, I have the English translation. Now it's important to remember that this book was written originally in Arabic, so all the translations should be taken into consideration, that they're not the original. But in front of me, I have here Rabbi Levi's Kuzari in Hebrew, which again is a translation. And here it's a very different translation than the one that you have in front of you. In English, it says, "This is a severe reproach, O king of Khuzars. It is a sin which kept the divine promise." He says, really, this is a terrible thing that the Jews of the Second Temple did not hear the voice of God calling them back to Zion. However, in my edition that I have here, the word in Hebrew is Achein matzata mekom cherpati melech Kuzar. He says, "You have ashamed me. You have ashamed me. You have caught me off. You're right. Basically, I have nothing to say." It's a very different translation, I think, that you have on your sheet here. I just took the translation I found online. But what I like about Rabbi Levi in this case is he basically starts by saying, "You're right." It's like, when a cop stops you and right away you start explaining all the different reasons why you were speeding, and then some tzaddikim will just say, "You got me. You're right. I was wrong. I sped." Is that what you say? I sped? I don't know. I was speeding. So it's very interesting to me that Rabbi Levi really doesn't give many terutzim, doesn't explain himself, but rather says, "Matzata mekom cherpati." You have ashamed me. You are right. It's interesting to point out in historical perspective that according to legend, Rabbi Levi actually did make Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael according to the book. Meaning, at the end of the book of Kuzari, he says goodbye to the king of Kuzar. He says, "I'm going now to Israel." We don't know if he actually made it. There is a famous legend that he came to Eretz Israel and he was killed as he was approaching the Kotel area. By the way, I challenge people, next time you go to the Kotel, I challenge you to go to the staircase by the Kotel, and you will see that one of the staircases there has a plaque on it called Ma'alot Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. And the staircase there is named for Rabbi Levi on the legend that was the area in which he was trampled to death by some Arab horsemen. So it's fascinating that a place was called based upon the midrash, or a legend, not a midrash, a legend that he actually made it there. So I started with that because I felt that there was a lot of honesty there coming from Rabbi Levi. Source number 2, we will meet the Tosafot in Masechet Ketubot. What's the context? The context here is very important. The Gemara Masechet Ketubot on page Kufid Aleph 110b is a very important source for the discussion whether or not there is a mitzvah to make aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, because the Mishnah there points out that if a couple is having an argument, a dispute, that one of the couples wishes to make aliyah and the other does not, the Gemara argues, the Mishnah argues, that whoever wants to make aliyah benefits legally from the move. Meaning, if a woman wants to make aliyah and her husband doesn't want to make aliyah, she can force him for a divorce, and she receives the ketubah, and vice versa. If the husband wants to make aliyah and she doesn't want to make aliyah, then the husband can divorce her, and she doesn't get the ketubah. Now, this is I'm not going to write the whole. This is not my topic right now, but it is an important indication that the Gemara took in consideration that living in Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah. Because if that wasn't the case, then surely a husband or a wife could not force each other. This became a very important source for the proof that there is a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael. Regarding this Gemara, the Balei Tosafot explain why they didn't make Aliyah. Mamash, it's almost like again, like as if you can hear between the lines. The Gemara says there's a mitzvah. The husband, the wife can force each other to make Aliyah. So basically, in other words, so why are we living in France? Why are we living in Germany? So fascinatingly enough, Tosfot says that it is not common to move to Israel nowadays because the roads are dangerous. Now that's a fascinating, I know that's a historical fact that at the time to make Aliyah meant to go in some little boat. Who knows how long it would take to get from France to Israel, and how many people perished perhaps on the way. We today, some people today have a custom of saying Hagomel every time they get off a plane. Rabbi Soloveitchik did not believe in that. Because my father, who learned by Rabbi Soloveitchik, never said Hagomel following his rabbi, the Rav, because the Rav used to fly apparently every week back and forth from Boston to New York, and he felt that it's not really dangerous, so he didn't make Hagomel when he flew. So nowadays, it's quite hard to argue that it's dangerous to fly. However, crossing the seas in the 13th century and 14th century obviously was very, very dangerous. And here is a kind of a reflection that Jews perhaps really felt it was too dangerous. Rabbeinu Chaim is quoted here on the second line of saying something much different than that, explaining that actually there is no obligation to live in Israel nowadays. Well, that's very different. Meaning, the first opinion that he quoted was there is an obligation, but we don't have to, if it's dangerous, we don't have to fulfill the mitzvah. That's a very interesting idea. What's dangerous? When does danger prevent us legally from performing a mitzvah? I'm not going to this question right now. It's a great halachic debate, I think, which is not my topic right now. But the second answer that Rabbeinu Chaim mentions is that there is no obligation. And the reason that he says that is because he says there are many mitzvot that apply only in the land of Israel, and we lack the expertise to fulfill them. Now, this is a very difficult idea to explain, to justify. In other words, he's saying there's no mitzvah yeshuv Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara is saying there is, but nowadays there isn't. Why? Because we can't fulfill the mitzvot hatliyot ba'aretz, the mitzvot that apply to in land of Israel are not applicable today. Either because we don't know how to keep them. We don't know the laws. It's like you're playing with fire, right? Fruit that are grown in Eretz Israel are obligated to Maasrot, Shemitah, Orla, Kilayim, all these halachot. But he's saying more than that, right? He's not just saying that it's scary, we're concerned, it's dangerous. He's saying that there's no mitzvah because of that, as if to suggest that the mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael comes and goes in Jewish history based upon our ability to keep the mitzvot there. Many people have, by the way, rejected this opinion and so many different levels, to the extent that one of the great Achronim actually has a tradition. The Maharit argues that this is a mistake, and that the Rabbeinu Chaim never said this, and that it was a Talmid To'eh. He actually says a student who didn't understand his rabbi's words said these words. Quite extreme, by the way, to be said about one of the Tosfot quotes. Interestingly enough, modern poskim like Yeshua Malko in the 20th century, referring to this Tosfot, said, well, if the situation changes, then of course nowadays when it's not dangerous, etc., they really refer and say that nowadays we know how to keep these mitzvot and etc., etc. Let's mention, by the way, one thought about the idea that if you can't keep mitzvot, or it's like dangerous, should that prevent you from performing a mitzvah? I'll give you an example where this comes up. Some people say, and this is not, again, it's a huge topic regarding going up to Har HaBayit. Should you go up to Har HaBayit or not? What is the main argument of those who say you shouldn't go up to Har HaBayit? They said, well, we're not sure where exactly the Mikdash, the temple, stood, and if you go there and you're impure, you might be chayav karet. It's a terrible sin to walk when you're impure on the place where the temple stood in the past. Those who justify it say, we know exactly where it stood, and we're not coming even close to that area. What's the other response to that? Well, why do you need it? You're playing with fire, right? So it's a similar idea, like, it's let's not go there. Let's not do that because it's a bit dangerous. By the way, I will tell you that in Hasidus, there are sources that actually explain why Jews should not go to Eretz Yisrael, because really what I just said now, because it's dangerous. It's playing with fire. In what way is it playing with fire? They say, well, Eretz Yisrael is so holy. It's God's land. So if you sin in Chutz La'aretz, okay, now if you do something, if you do an Aveira in Chutz La'aretz, it's not great, but not terrible. Why? Because you're far from God. But to go to God's backyard and to sin there, that's terrible. So I have sources. There are people that say, therefore, you shouldn't even play with fire. Stay put. Don't go and play. It reminds me, by the way, of some guys in Israel that believe very much in Tzahal, but never went to the Israeli army. And they were asked, why don't they go to the Israeli army? They say, Tzahal is such a holy thing, who are we to, we're not worthy of being in such a holy body called Tzahal, as if this reason is to prevent it. I feel Tosfot here is really saying the same idea, as if saying, oh, it's so dangerous to do, we don't know, so stay put and don't play with the word of mitzvot. The other approach is the exact opposite. Oh my gosh, we have an opportunity to do mitzvot, let's do them. At the time when Shemitah, every 7 years when Shemitah comes to Eretz Yisrael, we have the same exact argument. Some people say, oh my God, Shemitah is so complicated. We should, who knows if the fruit are holy or not holy. So the best thing is just buy the non-Jewish fruit and don't go into problems. And many rabbis in my community say, are you nuts? It's exactly the opposite. We have an opportunity to do a mitzvah. Let's embrace this and do the mitzvah properly rather than run away from it. So I think there's a deeper philosophy here, which is we can go on a lot about this, which is when the person has a challenge, should they run away from it or rather embrace it in the case of a mitzvah? So I think it's an interesting insight. Let's move to 19th century. I know we're skipping around here centuries, to the Avnei Nezer. The Avnei Nezer, for those who don't know who he was, it was Rav Avram Bornstein. Rav Avram Bornstein was a Hasidic Rebbe who in the Brisker world is respected. And I say that because, as you probably know, the Misnagdim don't always hold so much from the Hasidim when it comes to being Lamdanim and being Talmidei Chachamim. The biggest praise that the Avnei Nezer got was that he's a Brisker Lamdan. He's highly respected even outside the Hasidic community as a great Lamdan and a great Talmid Chacham. He lived into the 20th century. He married the Kutzker's daughter. I think it's fair to say that you don't marry the Kutzker's daughter because you fell in love with her. He was a great guy and a very respected Hasidic Rebbe who wrote the famous book on Hilchot Shabbat called the Eglei Tal being 39, and he also wrote, I'm quoting now from his book of Tshuvot, of his responsa called the Avnei Nezer. And what's important to know about him also, that besides the fact that he was a Sachat Sheva Rebbe, he was a great lover of Zion. He lived at the time when Zionism was starting to become more popular, and he for sure is considered to be one of the few rabbis of the time that really supported, believed, and loved the idea of Jews living in Israel and going back to Israel. And because of that, he himself challenges our question, and he even writes very explicitly, he writes, I don't understand really if it's so simple that there's a mitzvah and a value and a meaning to live in Eretz Yisrael, so he says, so why is it that really so many great rabbis that could have made Aliyah did not make Aliyah? In other words, what's stopping me now from making Aliyah? And he has I think such a amazing idea, which I can go on for a very long time to explain. I will not, because I want to move to other things, but his main point is the following. His argument is there is only a mitzvah to live in Eretz Yisrael if you can support yourself there. But to go to Eretz Yisrael and to live off schnorring tzedakah is not a mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael. He basically explains, he says, listen, as if I would now go to Eretz Yisrael, I can't work. I would have to live off people. And what all the great rabbis, he said in the generations, what stopped them was perhaps this reason. Now, by the way, it's important to notice at this point, before I continue, that the Gra, 100 years earlier than this, made an attempt to make Aliyah. We have a letter from the Gra that he was on his way to Eretz Yisrael and he returned. And there are speculations and articles written what made the Gra come back and decide not to make Aliyah. A lot has been written about this, many suggestions. Some are mamash strange, some are interesting. One of the, I can't know because the Gra never explained it, or at least we don't have testimony of what made him go back. But he, for example, some people suggest that his concern was the religious life in at the time in Israel, which would not be easy for him because of the aliyah of the Hasidim. In late 18th century, there was an immigration of Hasidim to Eretz Yisrael. And apparently the Gra may have been concerned that while he comes to Israel, he won't find a Misnagdish Minyan, and that the Hasidim took over the Shechita and maybe other areas of religious life. So that itself is an interesting idea that perhaps we find literature about this too, that certain rabbis were concerned again for religious reasons not to make Aliyah, that Dafka religious reasons was preventing them from making Aliyah. Here, it's very different. The Avinezer is saying that the religious reason is Parnasa, that it's important for a person to have a livelihood, and a person should work and his own money. But if you can't support yourself, and the alternative would be to live off tzedakah, well, then that's not a mitzvah of Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael. And as we know, in the 19th century, until I would say early 1880s, until the Aliyah Rishonah, Jews were not living off any work. They were living off tzedakah that was coming into communities. The Jews, most of them were learning Torah and living off tzedakah. And he really writes against this. Now, I find this fascinating because there's so much to take from this idea. I want to, first of all, explain the theology behind it and then add something else. The theology behind it is quite simple. That Eretz Yisrael is God's land. It's a place where you are supposed to attach yourself to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And what does that mean? We say in the Shema every day, if you listen to God, what will God give you? Rain and wheat and grain and livelihood. Where are the psukim referring to? Obviously, the land of Israel, where there's rain. And if we don't behave ourselves, we don't do God's will, then God will take away our parnasa livelihood. So Eretz Yisrael is the place in which we're not supposed to rely on people, but rather rely on God. So as if the Avinezer is saying, in Eretz Yisrael, we're supposed to work the land and take our chances with famine, rain, because we're putting our faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For us to live off tzedakah in Eretz Yisrael is against the whole notion of living directly connected to Kadosh Baruch Hu. I will add another piece here, which I think is very important, and that's the Chatam Sofer. The Chatam Sofer has a tshuva in which he discusses making aliyah to Israel, about whether or not it's a mitzvah to send money to people learning Torah in Eretz Yisrael. And the Chatam Sofer says that if a person cannot make a livelihood in Eretz Yisrael, this is 18th century, he says he should not make aliyah. In fact, he says, by doing that, you are harming the Jews that already live in Israel, who are also living off tzedakah, and you're taking away their tzedakah. So he Imamish comes out against those who are taking away the tzedakah. He says, if you don't have livelihood, you should make aliyah. But he says more than that, and this is, I think, a very profound idea that has become very famous in the Chatam Sofer's writings. I would say that in the religious Zionist community, this is probably the most famous Chatam Sofer. The Chatam Sofer refers to a discussion in Masechet Brachot in the Gemara regarding the question whether or not there is a mitzvah, or there's an ideal, I would say, for a Jew to learn Torah all day. I'm sure that this is a well-known argument nowadays. The Gemara, in the name of Rashbi, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai says, yes, if a person can, the ideal is to sit all day and learn Torah. The Gemara, however, says that that's impossible. If you learn Torah all day, I mean, who are you going to live off? Who's going to pay for your livelihood? Who's going to give you parnasa? The Gemara says people tried, v'lo al tabiyatam. And the Gemara therefore says that the accepted opinion is that you should work and learn Torah. That's like I would say, the famous Gemara that basically all Bnei Akiva, always likes to highlight. However, Rashbi seems to still say that it is an ideal. Comes along the Chatam Sofer and says a profound idea. He says, this Rashbi is only referring to Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, Rashbi says, if you can, sit and learn all day, learn all day. But in Eretz Yisrael, says the Chatam Sofer, there's a mitzvah to work the land. And then he says, that's equal to someone saying, live in Eretz Yisrael and don't put on tefillin. Those are the words of the Chatam Sofer. He compares working in the land of Israel to putting on tefillin. And he says, but in Eretz Yisrael, of course a person should work. So this Chatam Sofer is, I think, really is parallel to the words of the Nezer. We see there's a whole group of poskim here who really believe that in Eretz Yisrael there's a real value of working the land and developing the land. And as such, if a person is not going to be involved in that and just live off tzedakah, then apparently there's no mitzvah. And the Avnei Nezer seems to indicate in his tshuva that perhaps that's the reason why he and many other great rabbis didn't make aliyah, because they felt that they would have to live off tzedakah rather than to work off the land. I find that a very, very profound idea. I would like to move. To the next sources. I just realized though that I have the next source on the next page. I apologize. Let me try to one second. One second. I apologize. Rabbi Kelman, do you have the page itself in front of you?
I have the sources in the here. I can click on it and get it.
Oh, I have it now. I found it. I'm sorry. I put it on right now. I will put it on right now. Now I found it. I'm sorry.
Or in the chat box if anybody wants to click on it.
Okay. I actually found it right now. It was on. I have too many things open, but I will. Yeah, I can find it right now. I apologize, but it should be here. One second. I just have too many things open here. Here we go. Here, I found it. Okay, here we are. One second again. Okay, I apologize right now. Let's continue without it, and I will. Hopefully, you'll find it in the chat box. The next source is Rabbi Soloveitchik. Hopefully, in source number 4, I'll try to get it as I speak. Rabbi Soloveitchik was in a quite personal, emotional letter. And I find this, by the way, fascinating. I don't know many, Rabbi Kelman maybe will help me here. I don't know any great Gdolim in Jewish history that were shared their most sensitive kind of feelings, emotions, like Rav Soloveitchik did. I think people don't mention this enough, that he sometimes really describes his emotions, his feelings, what's going on with his life to the public in a way that I don't know any gadol that really exposed himself in such a way. And the story is like this. Rabbi Soloveitchik gave a famous lecture, which later was put into a book called Kol Dodi Dofek. It was a lecture for Yom HaAtzmaut, if I'm not mistaken, in somewhere in 1950s, in which he laid down the most pro-Zionist Israeli speech that any gadol has ever given. It's really quite remarkable. You can find it. It was put out in a book called Kol Dodi, in which he describes the meaning, the religious meaning, the theological meaning of the establishment of the state of Israel, how it affected all Jewry, what it meant religiously to all Jews around the world, etc., etc. Now, this was translated to Hebrew, and somewhere in the 60s, a group of Israeli students were learning this article with their teacher here, somewhere in Israel, and the girls were blown away. Wow, this is so beautiful. This is an amazing article, really beautiful. They said to their teacher, what's the name of the rabbi? She says, like, Rabbi Soloveitchik. They said, great, we want to meet him. Where in Yerushalayim does he live? And she says, no, he doesn't live in Yerushalayim. And they said, what do you mean? Where does he live? Tel Aviv? He said, no, not Tel Aviv. He lives in New York, in Boston. And they said, what? No, that can't be. We just read the most Zionist thing that we've ever, no Israeli rabbi has ever written like this. So they were so shocked. They couldn't understand it. So the teacher actually wrote a letter to Rav Soloveitchik in the name of her students. And she said, and they wrote, Rabbi, can you please explain to us what are the reasons that you're not coming to Israel? Now, it's interesting to know that the Rav did make a visit to Israel in 1935 when he was a young man. He was still in his 20s. He was offered to be a candidate to run for the position of being the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. He was a young rabbi at the time, and he lost to a very well-known Talmid Chacham who had a lot of connections in the Mizrahi, Rav Amiel, who was, if I'm not mistaken, it was a Mizrahi rabbi who was a rabbi in Belgium. And Rabbi Soloveitchik lost the vote to Rav Amiel. I heard once that while he was talking in Israel, it's 1935, it was the last year of Rav Kook's life, and Rav Kook met him. And when Rav Kook heard this young man speak, he was so taken by him, and he called his son Rav Tzvuda and said to him, I hear Reb Chaim. I hear, because Rav Kook was in Volozhin, so I hear Reb Chaim in this man's voice. Please, you should try to hear his Torah everywhere you go. And apparently Rav Tzvuda followed the Rav everywhere he went to give shirim. But that was the last time and only time that Rabbi Soloveitchik visited Israel. And these students were really were very puzzled. And this is a letter that the Rav wrote. By the way, I'm holding here in my hand. You can see there's a book called Community, Covenant, and Commitment. My good friend Rabbi Nati Helfgott, I'm sure you're familiar with, who gives shirim, I know, for Torah in Motion, collected many different articles and letters that Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote. He put them together, and this letter appears it's a translated letter. It appears in this book, and in it, Rabbi Soloveitchik says something very profound and very touching. He says, he writes that how in 1967, the year that this letter is written, his wife passed away. and he says, I'm reading to you, my world has collapsed and is ruined. My beloved soul of blessed memory. My Abba, by the way, described to us how the Rav was really heartbroken as a result of the passing of his wife, and perhaps he never ever got over it. And he says that they were thinking and planning to come visit Israel, but he said, my sighs are many and my heart grieves. And he says the following. He says, Eretz Yisrael is a place where a person should be happy. And he says, but I, who have such a heavy burden, my soul is so heavy with tsar, with pain. How much, he says, how could I now, I'm reading to you now, how could I now ascend to Jerusalem when I am a man of harsh and bitter spirit? God is not manifest when one is depressed, upset, and pained. Wow. I mean, I really do believe that Rabbi Soloveitchik really believed that he had a responsibility and a job in America and North America to really bring Judaism. We all know what Rabbi Soloveitchik did in North America. Without him, I don't know how Jewry would look today in North America. But he doesn't write that so much in this art. He writes something very personal, and I just find that quite shocking how revealing he is, how sharing he is with this problem of how can a Jew go to Eretz Yisrael when he is in mourning and is broken as he was at the same time. I would like to move now to one more last source, which might be the most fascinating of all, which is an article that I think you can use now a verb. I ChatGPT'd it. I put this article in ChatGPT, and in front of you on your sheet is a translation in English. I'm holding in front of me here a book. Hopefully you can see it, called Mishnat HaGoren. It is a book of Rav Shlomo Goren, chief rabbi of Israel, who wrote an article after the Rebbe died, describing his 4 different meetings with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And fascinatingly enough, and I think Rav Goren, that just shows you what kind of man Rav Goren was, that he had the audacity in each and every meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe to ask him, why doesn't he make Aliyah? I mean, I find that quite incredible that Rav Goren had no problem asking the Lubavitcher Rebbe to his face 4 times. Why is the Rebbe not making Aliyah and staying in Chutz La'aretz? And what's more fascinating is that each time the Rebbe gave a different answer. And I'll just it's a wonderful. I hope that you can read it to yourself afterwards. I'm not going to go. Obviously, it's a 3-page article. I send it to you online. I hope you enjoy reading it. But amongst other things, of course, he talks about the idea that he has responsibilities to build the Jewish community. We all, again, like similar to the Rav, we all recognize the contribution of the Lubavitcher Rebbe to North America and to establishing Jewish life in North America. But that doesn't necessarily explain why he didn't visit Eretz Yisrael. Like, he never came to Israel. Why didn't he leave for a visit? And he actually responded to this question, and he explains that he was concerned, amongst other concerns, that there's a halacha that argues that a person should not leave Eretz Yisrael. We spoke until now about the mitzvah to live, to dwell in the land of Israel. Parallel to this, there is a separate sugya in Shas that appears maybe in 2 different places. It's actually in the Daf Yomi, and Avodah Zarah came up not very long ago, that there might be a Easter standing by itself, reading not necessarily as part of the mitzvah of living in Israel. There might be a Isur of itself to leave the land of Israel. And in fact, the Rambam rules, based upon his understanding of the Gemara, that leaving Israel is only permitted for very, very specific reasons, for getting married, for learning Torah, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe actually says that if he would make a visit, not even Aliyah, he was concerned that perhaps he wouldn't be allowed to leave the land of Israel, and that's one of the reasons that prevents him not only from making Aliyah but also for visiting. He also mentions that, and this is something that I find quite difficult to understand, maybe because I'm not a chassid, but he really talks about his attachment to his ancestors who are buried, his father-in-law who's buried there, and this is something that really puzzles me very much. I find it very hard to understand the theological meaning behind this, but the Lubavitcher Rebbe really saw some kind of meaning, theological meaning, in staying in Crown Heights next to the burial site of his father-in-law, and he also brings that as a reason why he doesn't have to leave the area. It almost sounds, I mean, that you can reach as if the same level of kedushat Eretz Yisrael as if that one could in Eretz Yisrael in staying by the Rebbe. By the way, and this is and this you will find in Chassidut similar ideas that really compare certain places or people that their level, their theological experience that one can experience being next to them is parallel to the land of Israel. And in fact, I saw that some people say that the minhag of the Baal Shem Tov was not to sleep not to be in a sukkah on the 8th day of Sukkot, right? The Shmini and Chutzars, there's a big argument what you do, but one of the reasons they said is because he felt that he reaches the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael level even in Chutzars. So there is literature about this idea, and this is I would say in Hasidus, this is a very interesting idea of perhaps understanding that the kedusha that one can achieve even outside in Israel can be sometimes achieved even outside the land of Israel. I don't know if you are familiar with all the famous Rosh Hashanah in Uman kind of theory. For many people in Israel find it very hard to understand why would Jews leave Israel on a Yom Tov to Chutz La'aretz when we know usually it's the opposite. So again, if you follow this theology, then perhaps you can understand more what's behind it. So the bottom line is, I gave today, I would say, a very wide kind of the wide spectrum, I would say, of opinions that almost apologized or explained to the people their reasons of why they lived in Chutz La'aretz, what kept them in Chutz La'aretz, from danger of making aliyah to maybe not being a mitzvah, not having a mitzvah, to their commitments to their community, to the idea of parnasa, to personal reasons of being in pain, like the Rabbi Soloveitchik. I think we saw a very wide range of opinions. I want to add one last thing that I would like to leave it open for questions in a few minutes if people have questions. But I want to mention one. There's actually there's tshuvot. I didn't bring this because this is more tshuvot, less personal. But there are tshuvot of rabbis that told that there's in Rabbi Aviad Chassid. Rabbi Aviad Chassid, who lived in the 13th century, also goes back to the discussion of Rabbeinu Chaim HaKohen, explained that it's too dangerous to make aliyah because of religious reasons that people might go off the derech, right? That's not what he says, but like the idea that staying in Chutz La'aretz is better for your Torah, for your frumkeit. Israel is a dangerous place. You can become as if not religious going to Israel. Now, I thought when I saw that, I was like fascinated. Why? Because I'm hearing in the 21st century certain people who are making that argument nowadays, by the way, I don't know if Rabbi Kilman knows what I'm talking about, but it's quite fascinating that also I hear some rabbis nowadays who say, oh, we want to stay put because because our the danger to Torah. We see people are there's a lot of chiloniut in Eretz Yisrael, etc., etc., etc. Which is, by the way, even more fascinating when you read literally things that were written today by certain political leaders in Israel who, again, mamash in the past 24 hours, have argued that if they're forced to let it go to the Israeli army, then they're going to leave the land of Israel, arguing that the land of Israel is a dangerous place for Torah and Yiddishkeit, and also as if a reason for them to not live in Eretz Yisrael. So I would say there's a lot going on here, and I really try to give a large spectrum. Not, again, as I said, I'm not judging anyone. Everyone has their life and their world and their discussions. We saw many reasons and explanations in Jewish history. I just think that there's a lot to get from it. I think it's fascinating to be exposed to so many of these different questions and explanations, and to realize that life is a bit complex and not so black and white. There's a lot of gray areas here, this was like a taste a little bit of how different rabbis really spoke about this very, very kind of sensitive matter in their life. And at this point, I would like to, if anyone has what to comment, to argue, and to question, I'm happy to hear.
Anybody, any comments? If not, this is nobody. I could go on for the next hour, but I won't. I have a lot to say on my respect. It's very interesting. Really, nobody wants to say anything?
Rabbi?
Uh,
Rabbi?
yeah. Marty, yes.
Rabbi, last week I was in a class on the film, and we talked about the whole idea is that it's very halachically impermissible to sell land to a non-Jew in Israel, and is that really a mitzvah? Is a Jew allowed to sell land to a non-Jew? That's my question.
I mean, that's a good question, but if it's okay, I don't think this would be the right time because to answer this, it's a question to do really with Shemitah and Hitter Mechira. It's a good question, but I just think it's a little bit out of the realm of our of where we're coming from. I'm happy to address it another time, but it's really a larger question.
And my second question is about I know how binding is the idea that you cancel leave Eretz Yisrael? Is it a minority opinion? Does everybody believe that? I know there was a big question people asked that the Rambam left Eretz Yisrael and went to Egypt.
Right. That's a famous question.
So
Yeah. Right.
know.
But the Rambam doesn't really explain that. I was trying more to talk about people that explained it rather than people that did it. Meaning, I was only referring to texts that actually people wrote an explanation. That's why the Rambam, to my knowledge, doesn't explain exactly why he did what he did. I can maybe guess, but I was trying to refer to only to texts that people left behind, trying to explain their decision in life, what they did.
Rabbi, anybody else? Otherwise, Rabbi, I'll make it if you want, I'll make a couple comments. But
Bakasha, yeah.
First of all, your last thing that you made about people saying it's dangerous to make Aliyah, I think it's a lot in the modern Orthodox world. Forget the Haredim. There are statistically, I think, more teenagers become non-frum in Israel than here in Chutz La'aretz. I just think I don't have to tell you where you live how many people, how many from families have kids who aren't from. I mean, it happens here too. I don't mean to say, but and I know many rabbis who say once your kids hit teenage years, absolutely don't make aliyah because it's too hard to adjust. I'm not judging.
Right,
People.
right. I'm not. Like I said, I'm not.
Right.
Right. It's a
I
little bit.
think I'll just add two other things and then I'll stop it because there's a lot to say. I think two other people who you could have quoted who you didn't quote. Well, I guess Rav Moshe gives the famous halachic argument that there's
Right.
no obligation to, but leave it at
Correct.
that. Let's talk about the Sridei Eish. The Sridei Eish and Mark Shapiro. I just spent 2 weeks with in Europe on our trips, and he actually spoke about it. Your first thing I was smiling because he always say the majority of the poskim say there's no mitzvah to live in Israel. It's a nice thing to do, but there's no obligation. The exact opposite.
Well,
What he said was
I didn't. I didn't say that. I didn't. By the way, I didn't. It's not my opinion. I'm quoting Rav Aviad Yosef,
right. So it's interesting
who
because
counted all the poskim and say
yeah,
it
right.
as well. But Rav Aviad Yosef said that, by the way, as well as Rav Shechter. Rav Hershel Shechter says it explicitly also.
Right.
I'm quoting Rav Shechter and Rav Aviad. It's not. It
Right.
wasn't mine.
I hear a number of shit, but like the Rambam, in other words, the Rambam, Rav Moshe, the Rambam, all these people hold there's no obligation. It's a mitzvah to do it, but you're not obligated. But leaving that aside, the Sridei Eish explained that he didn't make Aliyah because of the extremism in Israel, and I found that it's in Mark's book.
In the biography.
He was offered many jobs, and he says in Switzerland where he lived, or in the government somewhere
Thank
else,
you for that.
he could have been, he was respected in the Mizrahi world, the Aguda world. I believe he's the only person in world history, the only person he was offered a job. I understand after the war, in Slobodka Yeshiva, at the Yeshiva University, at Hebrew University, and Jewish Theological Seminary. So you have to imagine a person who can be offered a job and all these different things. And he said, if I went to Israel, I would have to choose because you can't live in two worlds in Israel.
Correct.
And he
Thank you.
doesn't want that. And
Right.
I thought to me, that's a very powerful
Thank you.
message.
I agree. Thank you for that. I will next time I give this share, I will add this Sridei Eish B'ezrat Hashem because I think you're 100% right. That would be a good source to add.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm talking too much. Anybody else? Here we are, a bunch of people like me living in Chutz La'aretz. So it's what can I say? So okay. All right. If not, so well, thank you very much. Hope things are going well. I enjoy Camp Stone.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Tomorrow morning, of course, my share on the Siddur, 9:15. All our regular classes next week. I mentioned this morning, Rabbi Eric Grossman from Montreal is starting a series on wisdom in the Torah. I sent out the email earlier today, Wednesday at 11 a.m. And of course, next Sunday, we'll have our all-day, 8-hour long Tisha B'Av program. So, which is a different registration link. So you won't be able, you have to register separately for our Tisha B'Av program. That's, of course, a week Sunday, beginning 11 a.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. in Israel, and then going through till 7 p.m. Eastern time. Okay, everybody. Thank you, Rabbi Tabory. Really a fascinating.
Thank you.
I think a very interesting topic on the topic, and just life is complex, as you say, and everybody, like you say, we don't criticize. It's just interesting to see the perspectives. So thank you very much, and Laila Tov, everybody. And
Laila Tov. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.